This morning I was thinking about our series Songs of the Summer, and we were looking at the Psalm 1 last week, and I was thinking about Desmond Doss. Does that name sound familiar? Do you know that guy's name? Desmond Doss?
Yes, I do.
You recognize the name?
He's one of the most admirable people I've ever heard of in my life.
Yeah. He very much is like that. If you don't know the story behind him, he is one of the most decorated soldiers from World War II. And what makes him highly unusual, besides getting the Medal of Honor and that, is that he is a medic. And he was a conscientious objector going into the war. And he said, I will be a part and I want to help and I want to serve my country. He said, but I'm not going to carry a gun. I'll be a medic. And so Desmond Doss, and this is outlined in the movie Hacksaw Ridge. You might have heard of that or seen that. His exploits, because during the Pacific part of World War II, he was involved in rescuing single-handedly, one by one. Think about this, single-handedly, one by one, over 70 men. He's carrying them to safety, one by one, in the midst of the Japanese attack. And he's a medic, and he's not even firing back. He's not even doing anything like that. What's that?
From the top of the cliff to the bottom.
Yes, yeah, and had to carry them down from the top of a cliff down to the bottom so they could get further medical attention. And so he got the Medal of Honor, and I was thinking about him because that's the kind of strength of character we see exhibited in Psalm 1. That's the kind of strength of character, because he was a devout Christian man who stood on his principles. And he shows this great strength of character in time of combat. Because what does Psalm 1 say? It says, you will stand like a tree planted by waters. You're thriving, you're strong, you have that kind of vitality. And that's what he had. So whether you're a Christian and your time of great testing where your strength of character is going to come out, whether it be on a battlefield or whether it be in a hospital or whether it be around a kitchen table. At some point, if you're a Christian, your strength of character will be tested. Count on it. And will you stand like a tree, well planted? And that's what we learned from last week, and is that if you don't stand in your faith, you won't stand at all. If you don't stand in your faith, you won't stand at all. Because when that time of testing comes, your knees will buckle, and you'll be flat, and life will overwhelm you. But God promises to those who stand in faith that they'll have that strength of character. So that's what we were talking about last week. This week, kind of moving forward a little bit, and we're continuing, still the songs of summer, so we're still talking about songs, because that's what the Psalms are. They are the hymnal, they're the playlist, they're the music of the ancient Israelites. And, there's some songs and some artists, singers, bands, whatever, that become so popular that even if you don't want to know their music, you're not interested in it, you're not trying to learn it, doesn't do anything for you, you just don't even care. But they're so popular that even if you didn't want to know their music, you still know their music. Because they're just so popular. You couldn't care less about this band or their music or songs, but they've become so widespread and so popular that you know it anyways. I was looking at the song list, and it's showing the most popular songs per decade. And surprised by it, they started with the 1940s, and the most popular song of the 1940s. Now, I wasn't born then, I don't know, firsthand, but the most popular song of the 1940s was White Christmas. The whole decade, that was the most popular song of the 1940s, was White Christmas. Remember who sang that?
Bing Crosby.
Bing Crosby. Yeah. Here we are, 2021, And we all know the most popular song of the 1940s. You know? And then you look at the most popular songs of the 1950s. You know, there's Love Me Tender, and there's Jailhouse Rock, you know, and there's Nothing But a Hound Dog,
Blue suede shoes.
and Blue Suede Shoes. And here we are all these years later, and we all know that was songs by who?
Elvis.
That's Elvis, yeah. And you go on through the 60s, and you got a band that sings Let It Be and Hey Jude, and I Want to Hold Your Hand, you know.
Beatles.
And it's the Beatles, yeah. Now, even if you didn't care about these bands, it's not your type of music, whatever, you can't really avoid it. And you look at the songs of the 70s and 80s, I found this interesting. They're also intertwined now in commercials. That a lot of young people who would never know these songs know them from commercials because they bought the rights to them and they use the music in commercials. And so these, whether you care about the music or not, they're so popular you can't avoid it. You just know it. Now the psalm we're going to look at today, or the song we're going to look at today, is the most popular one in the Bible. Now the reason I say that is because it shows up in the New Testament as well. In fact, it shows up in the New Testament either as a direct quote or reference more than any other song. And so it's the most popular song in the Bible. And so that's what we're going to look at today. And it has a very interesting focus in it. Choosing sides. Choosing sides. And so we're going to look at the most popular song in the entire Bible today. And the focus is choosing sides. So the most popular song in the entire Bible is our focus today. And the topic is choosing sides. Everybody say it with me. Choosing sides. That's where we want to be focusing our attention. The most popular one is the next one in there. It's Psalm 2. So if you find the book of Psalms kind of in the middle of your Bible and go to the left a little bit, you get back to the beginning. And out of those 150 Psalms, Psalm 2 is the most popular one in the whole Bible. If you're not currently reading something consistently or any kind of plan to your reading in the Bible, read it through the Psalms with us. That way when we reference it and talk about it on Sunday morning, you already be familiar with it and it'll be fresh to you. So read through the Psalms with us. And on Psalm 2, we're going to look at it in 3 parts. We're going to look at it in 3 parts. And the first part is the first 3 verses. Okay? The first part is the first 3 verses. And it says, "Why do the nations conspire?" And some translations use rage, but the other translations that use conspire there, what they're doing is they're working off the second word that kind of correlates. It says, "Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot?" So it's kind of working against that. Conspire and plot. Why do the nations conspire and the people plot in vain? The kings of the earth take their stand, and the rulers gather together against the Lord and against his anointed one. Let us break these chains, they say, and throw off their fetters. So that's the first part. You have this kind of commentary. You have this bit about the nations, the rulers, their leaders, and the people, that are with them. And they say, let us gather together against the Lord and against his who? What does it say?
Anointed.
Anointed one. And so this has long been understood as a messianic song. So it's talking about the Messiah, his anointed one. And then it goes on, that's the first part. Okay, so you got that part about the nations, their kings and all, and how they're fighting against God's anointed one, the Messiah. The second part, and it says, the one enthroned in heaven laughs, the Lord scoffs at them. He rebukes them. Now see, this second part goes all the way down from 4 to 12. And you get, I'm going to go read through it word for word, but what you get here in the second part is basically the response to these people plotting. They've rejected God. They're rebelling against God. They want nothing to do with God and his anointed one, the Messiah. Okay? So they're fighting back against God. So that's the first part. The second part is the response. And it basically says, it's absurd what they're trying to do. It's irrational. It would make God laugh. Because they're people, they're kings. They're all his creation. I mean, you're talking about the God of the universe. And they're thumbing their nose at him. And they're trying to kick sand in his face. They're trying to, reject him. He's the God of the universe. That's absurd. You're not going to win that battle. It's irrational. And so, it's like God would be laughing at them about this. And it goes on, and it talks again about the Messiah. It's about serving the Lord with fear. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry. It's like, you better come to his Messiah, and you better, be on your knees. That's how you need to approach him. Because he's God, and you're mere men. And it says, for his wrath can flare up a moment. So that's that second part. You have the response of God and his anointed one, the Messiah. And then at the very end, it said, it shifts gears, and this is the last part of 12. It says, blessed are all who take refuge in him. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. And so you're reading through this and you go, well, okay, so you got this first part about the kings and the rulers and they're fighting against the Messiah, which, we know is Jesus. They're rejecting him completely. They want him no part of their life. And that's no surprise because you could ask any missionary abroad about how they're received sometimes by local authorities, by the government. And we can say some commentary about that in our own country as well. So we see that. And then, the second part where God's responding to him, it's almost like in the form of a threat. It's almost like a warning. You can see that kind of language, that he's going to rule them with an iron scepter. He is warning them to serve them and rejoice and trembling. You could be destroyed. This is kind of a warning to them. And so he puts that out there. And then at the end, we have that concluding part at the end of 12. Now think about this. This is the most popular song in the whole Bible. And it's like I said, a warning or a threat. It's kind of like putting on notice these rulers, these authorities, these people. But they'll never hear this song. This is the average Israelite, learning this song as a kid. This is the average Israelite singing it. This is it, learning it. This is the average Israelite singing it together with others in worship. But who are they singing it to? It sounds like they're, confronting these evil leaders, these evil nations. But they're just singing it to each other. Because the point is, it's for them. It's for them. Because when it comes down to it, they're going to be choosing sides. they're going to be choosing sides. Now, in the first century, when we have the Gospels, and we have the birth of Christ and the life of Christ, and when these all events are taking place, in the first century, that people were taking sides in a big way. Because they thought the way they were supposed to take sides against these evil nations and against these evil rulers was by attaching themselves to the culture and the nation of Israel. So you had some people taking sides in the first century and becoming zealots. And that basically means that they thought that the best way for them to honor God was to take up a sword and to fight and rebel against the Roman occupation. To kill Romans when they could get away with it. To steal from them. To harass them. To be rebels. That's what they thought they were doing in choosing sides. The zealots. Remember, Jesus had one of his disciples that had been known as a zealot. So these are very violent men that have very big ambitions about fighting and bringing down the Roman occupation of Israel. So that was the zealots. But you also have not just fighting against Roman government, but you have another group fighting against the culture overtaking. And that was what we see with the Pharisees. See, the Pharisees thought, that they would take their religious motivations and they would use that as a fight against the Roman and Greek culture that was taking over Israel. Because the Roman and Greek culture took over everywhere it occupied. You get into these nations that were very much unlike that culture. And the Roman and Greek culture together, because those were kind of blended together, it would just take it over. And so the Pharisees were fighting against that. And here's the thing. People were choosing sides because you have the Zealots fighting in their way against the government and the Romans, and you have the Pharisees fighting against their way against the culture that come from the Romans. And then you had the others who were choosing the other side. They chose to reject their Jewish heritage. They chose to reject the way of life that they had been brought up in. They chose sides too. Because, in their mindset, why would you not join the winning side? Why would you not make your life easier? Why fight against, something you're not going to win? Just be done with that whole Jewish heritage, Jewish faith. Just be done with that and become like the Romans, because the Romans are in charge. And so you had a lot of Jews in that first century turning from their faith. There's a procedure that became popular during this time, and it hit its peak as far as, how we know it from history. It hit its peak during that first century, and it's called reverse circumcision. You got an idea what circumcision is? There was actually a procedure to reverse it, so that you would no longer look like a Jew. So that you would no longer look like a Jew. That's how adamant, that's how, desirous these people were of splitting themselves away from their Jewish heritage, of choosing sides. Because, after all, who wouldn't want to join the winning side? And you just look at the Romans and you go, well, they're the obvious winners here. They're the big boys on the block. Why not join them? Make your life easier. And so they would go to that extent to identify as a non-Jew. I remember back in high school playing football, and whenever there was a fight on the football field, like a scrimmage, not against another team, but just our own team, and that something would happen and it would just break out in a fight. And this happened a lot in football. It's just, I think, the nature of it. We would always look for Chad. Because my buddies and I, Chad was like 6'4", and he was like 350. I mean, he was a huge man. Or a kid, really, at that point. But But he was huge. And whoever Chad was fighting, that's who we were fighting. Because we didn't want to fight Chad. Chad was the biggest thing on the field. So it didn't matter what it was. We just wanted to be on his side. Because you didn't want to be against him. So everybody joined Chad's side. We didn't know why we were fighting. We didn't know anything about it. But if Chad's fighting him, we're fighting him. And you can't really hurt yourself in football. I mean, you're colored in pads, so it's kind of silly anyways. But that was just our mindset. Just be on Chad's side. Well, these guys are choosing sides, and they're like, well, I'm not choosing the Jewish side, because that's nothing but headaches and trouble. And so they don't. And so they're choosing sides. And Jesus steps into the middle of this. And he's not choosing sides. If you read through carefully the Gospels, there's a lot of attempts to make him choose a side. They want him to take sides. But Jesus didn't come to take sides. He came to take over. And so they try to identify him as a zealot. And you see that. And then they try to paint him like a Pharisee. And you see that. And then they try to paint him like a Samaritan. I mean, they just go into all different kinds of ways. And he's not taking sides because he came to take over. Because he's the authority. He's the Messiah. He doesn't have to take sides. You know, Christians today, we're tempted to feel like we're taking sides. And we feel like some of these other people did, we feel like, you know what, I just gotta fight culture. The culture's changing, it's changing in a bad way, and Christians will spend time and energy and money pouring themselves into these causes trying to fight culture. And they get very motivated by it. And that becomes their whole life. You can't talk to them for 10 minutes without that coming up. That just becomes their whole focus. They're Christians, but boy, where their agenda really lies. They're just fighting the culture because the culture looks so toxic. And that's who they become. You know more about what they're against than what they're for. And then there's some Christians that, point all that towards the government and get involved in politics. And they think, well, if we just get this leader elected and we just get this happening here and this court like that, then everything will turn out the way we want it to. And they throw their whole energy and the money and everything into that. And some Christians choose another side. And their doctrine and their theology of beliefs, they water it down, they water it down, and they water it down until you can't tell the difference between culture and them. Until you can't tell the difference. Because they've chosen sides. But here's the thing. Jesus doesn't say take up a sword. Doesn't say fight and take up the cause against the culture. He says take up a cross. And that's on you. And that's on me. We're called to take up a cross. We're called to take up a cross. We're called to deal with what we can most effectively deal with. And that's us. Because I can't change culture. Despite all my efforts. And I can't change the government about who's elected and who's on a court or any of that. Despite my best efforts. And that's not where my efforts are supposed to be anyways. I'm called to take up a cross. And that's harder. Because I'd much rather be focused on somebody else. I'd much rather be focused on a cause. I'd much rather be focused on government. And Jesus says take up a cross. Well, that's me. Because that's the way forward. When you're choosing sides, you're choosing the Messiah. Because that's the way forward, because blessed are all who take refuge in him. Not these other sides, not these other causes, not these other things. Blessed are those who take refuge in him. And that's where we have to put our focus. That's where our hearts have to be. That's who we have to be. Imagine what God would do in your life and the lives of others if we did that. We took refuge in Him. We didn't try and fight every fight. We didn't try and make every point. We didn't try and argue everybody down. We didn't try to get everybody certain elected. But if our first priority was to take refuge in Him, to take up our cross and be the people we're called to be, instead of all these other things that try to pull us away and distract us and get us off track, because that's who's blessed. And when you do that, you're choosing the side of God's anointed one, the Messiah. As the music plays, that's what I want to put on your heart this morning. Because you're going to probably get things that are, and it may be from a family member, or maybe a friend, maybe a coworker, or whoever, that's going to try and tie you up in things of this world. And there's nothing wrong with being involved with politics, and there's nothing wrong with having a cause. But make sure first things are first. And above all else, you're choosing to follow Christ.